Sarah has been teaching high school English for over 13 years and has a wonderful resume filled with reception of many awards and has speaking engagements across the country. And actually, I'll let her tell you a little bit more about herself just right now. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to show you my face a little bit, let you know I am a real live teacher, and I'm excited today to talk to you about vocabulary. So first, gotta click in here. And just a couple of points about me. I am nationally board certified, and I'm working on my renewal this year for all of those out there who are doing the same. And I have taught English for 13 years. I'm currently working as the high school librarian, but also working with English teachers and really still loving vocabulary and the vocabulary in the classroom. I am currently the past president of Octella, which is the Ohio version of NCTE, and was the Teacher of the Year back in 2010. So hopefully I have a little bit of credibility, and then I like to go and present, take my show on the road, as it were. All right, so let's get going. First, VocabGal. If you just go to vocabgal.com, as you see here at the bottom, that's where you can find me and all the strategies. And every week we have a new post that's a new activity or game or just idea of how to use vocabulary in the classroom. So, and you can see we also have the vocabulary word of the week each week, which is also pretty exciting to help you out specifically with this webinar. So, what is the goal for today? It's always nice to have a goal. In the next half an hour, you will walk away with essentially skills and strategies so that you can ensure your students will do well on their standardized tests. So that's what's most important. All right, so the first key is making sure that your students are prepared. And how do you make sure that that happens? First, you want to make sure that students understand the format of the test questions. So obviously you're giving them some similar test prep questions so they understand what the test looked like. The strategies we're going to talk about today more in depth. They know the learning targets, they know what the test is asking them, and then they know which ones they have mastered. I'm going to keep going here. And the ones that they haven't mastered. And so that's good if you can walk them through their own checklist of, okay, here's what the test is going to ask you, and then this is how you know if you know the material or not. And then as you're working to make sure that they know the material, we'll talk about review strategies. That's what my blog is really all about, is ways to review the vocabulary and the ideas that you present to them in fun and engaging ways. And there's lots of great activities on the blog, including some flashcards, how to do quizzes, lots of different activities, more that I'll review in the next webinar, but just know that there's lots of ways that you can make sure your students know the material. So the first handout that you will get that will be emailed to you after this webinar, you can also find it online at vocabgal.com anytime, are basically my top 5 tips for preparing for the SAT and ACT. And that's really important because I want to make sure that my students do well, and so how do I ensure that? The first way is to make complicated words mundane. And that word mundane in and of itself is kind of complicated. So that's what I want to make sure that that happens. So you can see my example here in purple. My dad used to say the word facetious a lot, and he would say that we were astute. And those words became commonplace to me, even though I was a young child, and I began to learn what those words are. So in the same way, in my classroom, what I like to do is I like to essentially talk to the kids, and one of our first vocabulary words is meritorious, and another one is approbation. And so what I like to do is I like to say, oh, who's worthy of approbation for being meritorious? And that sounds a little awkward and cumbersome, but after saying it for a couple weeks, the students just know what meritorious and approbation are, and they get excited when they see those words in context, and they have just become commonplace because I've said them so often. So that's sort of your first strategy, is the tough vocabulary that you're teaching them. The more that you can incorporate that into your everyday routines, the better the students will know the words, and then they will become mundane and facile. Second, matching tough words with easy synonyms. And this is really helpful because I think sometimes our students are intimidated by the words and they think, oh, I don't know how I can use that. So my example here is sanguine. That sanguine seems pretty complicated, and you can talk about the roots and blood, etc. But when you get down to it, it sort of means someone who is jolly. And so when we start saying jolly, and then we just replace that with sanguine. So what is Santa? He's sanguine. And when you check, your students say, is this working right? Am I using this correctly? If they can replace sanguine with jolly, they know, okay, Santa is jolly. that sounds right. So then when I say Santa is sanguine, it means the same thing. And so that's sort of my step number 2 in terms of breaking down tough words for students, is just to make sure that you have an easy synonym that they can test. Am I using this word correctly? Number 3, you can see that my title, recite, repeat, reiterate, is again literally what I mean. This also goes with step number 1. The more that you can use vocabulary in the classroom, and the more that you can emphasize to students the need to use vocabulary in every single assignment that they do, the more that they will internalize those words. Excuse me. So you'll notice that every single assignment that students do, they have to incorporate a few vocab words. And this is for any essay they complete, any homework that's a literary analysis. No matter what the homework assignment is, I ensure that they absolutely have to have 2 or 3 vocabulary words. It's a separate grade as part of that assignment, but it's just constant reinforcement that vocabulary is a part of their writing, and it's something that we incorporate into every aspect of the English classroom. Same thing, if students say the words out loud, they get a sticker. And I get sheets of lots of little tiny stickers, and so I have a student who goes around and gives a kid a sticker. Every time he uses a vocabulary word out loud, as more we reiterate it, the more they stick. And finally, they can earn points if we're in a discussion, a Socratic seminar or whatnot, and they use vocabulary, then they can get more points for their discussion points. Okay, so number 4, we're going to talk about more later when I give you some example sentences, but know that the strategy when it comes to using SAT and ACT words in tests is to read the sentence aloud, the test sentence that is, with each option, A, B, C, and D. And again, I'll show you this more when we get to it. And finally, step 5 is to break down word parts. And I bet a lot of you do this already in your classroom, so good job. Give yourselves a pat on the back. Essentially, that anytime you're teaching a vocabulary word, it's nice to talk about the structure and the roots. And it doesn't have to be long and complicated, and you don't have to do huge units on roots, but just a reminder to students, hey, that word benevolent, that root word bene, what does bene mean in Spanish? Oh, benevolent, bueno, ben means good. Okay, what does mal mean? Mal, maleficent, malevolent, etc. Oh, mal means bad. And so when you can just have a moment to work in a root word, then you can teach kids essentially to work in these strategies when they're coming across words they don't know, but they know some root words and word parts. So again, those are essentially my top 5 tips for preparing for the vocabulary aspects of the SAT. Number 1 is just making those complicated words mundane. 2, working in those synonyms that are easy with the tough words. 3, making sure those words get reiterated all the time. 4, we'll talk about the reading sentences out loud with vocabulary. And finally 5, breaking down word parts. And again, if you have any questions, please type them on the side in your question box, and I will try and address as many as I can at the end. Okay, so this is where we're really going to get specific in terms of the different types of questions. So you'll see here the first strategy is step number 4 is to replace the vocabulary word with each answer. And you'll actually get this handout. I'm really excited that you get it. And so you'll see the first strategy to give kids is, hey, if the question asks you to define the word, replace the original word with each of the choices. So in this one, I used Little Bo Peep. Now, I teach high school students, and so I know you think, Sarah, this is a little bit beneath them, but no, to use this easy passage gives them some confidence, and so that then when they attack a harder passage, they remember that strategy and they think, if I knew it for Bo Peep, I can figure it out for something harder. So here, the best definition for the word wagging, well, let's see if I put in shaking. Shaking their tails behind them. No, that sounds pretty good. Movement their tails behind them. And that doesn't sound right. And we, as English teachers, know that it's not a verb, but as long as they can hear it sound wrong, we can eliminate that answer. See, running. Running their tails behind them. That may work a little bit, but not quite. Jumping their tails behind them. No, their tails, well, they're not really jumping. And their tails themselves don't really run. Okay, so shaking is the best answer there. And that's how you essentially replace each vocabulary word, each vocabulary answer with the word in question. Okay, number 2 strategy I like too because it's part of what the new SAT asks, that we justify our answer by finding textual evidence. And I tell my students, if you can prove why you feel that answer is correct, chances are you're pretty close, if not on the right answer. So here, the question is, why should little Bo Peep be happy? She has lost her sheep. That doesn't make any sense because she's unhappy that she's lost her sheep. Her sheep will return on their own. Well, you look, leave them alone and they'll come home. I've got some justification for that, so I've underlined that one. Her sheep like to wag their tails. Well, there's nothing that I can prove that says they enjoy doing it. It just says they're wagging their tails. And finally, she cannot find her sheep. That's not a positive idea. So I can justify answer B, and so that's going to be the best answer. Also, just the idea of underlining your ideas overall and crossing out wrong answers is a strategy that I don't think we necessarily teach our students to use enough. Really marking all over their papers. And I had a teacher friend of mine who said, look, it's a class set, but if you have to mark on it, and we'll make another copy. Because that's the key there. If they really need to mark on it, have them do it. So in this case, the question asks, what does the story imply about the sheep? They do not like a little Bo Peep. Okay, there's nothing in there that implies that, so I'm going to cross that out. They like to eat biscuits when they return home. There's nothing in this passage about biscuits, so I'm going to cross that one out. They've been trained how to find their home. Okay, again, we're going back, we're underlining where we can justify that answer. They'll come home, if we leave them alone, well, that implies perhaps some training. Finally, D, they are happiest when they're lost. Well, there's nothing that can really justify that they are happiest when they're lost. It just says that when they return home, they'll be wagging their tails. So C is the best answer. All right, so let's talk about this redesigned SAT. I was pretty nervous when I heard about the redesign. I didn't know if this was going to work for students. I didn't know what this entailed. So in preparation for this webinar, I did a lot of research. And as you can see, I've jotted down the key changes. Essentially, and this all comes from the AP College Board. That's where I went to do my research. It is firsthand from them. And so this is what I'm reporting to you. Instead of having just vocabulary words in isolation, they're going to be in a passage, and then students will have to determine what is the best use of that word based on its context clues. So we'll talk about that. We're already doing that in our teaching, and I've got some strategies for that one. The command of evidence. They really have to, again, be able to justify their answers, not only in multiple choice, but then also provide evidence for the essay. The essay then analyzes a source more than asks them to write about whatever they want. The problems are grounded in the real world. Always important, and then I think that's one of the big keys that they want to say this is going to be relevant to students who are going on to careers. There's going to be more analysis of science, history, and social studies. Global conversations, so the text they're using are going to be some founding documents and some really interesting documents from throughout our nation and key problems that are happening right now. And then the no penalty for wrong answers, and this is really harkening back to APs and our old SATs where they got points off if they guessed incorrectly versus not guessing at all. We don't really have to worry about this too much anymore, so good. Let's talk about relevant words in context. Here you'll notice that, as what I've underlined, the focus of the questions is determining meaning based on context clues. Okay, that's easy enough. Command of evidence is our big key, that here they have to figure out what part of the text best supports their answer. Already a great test-taking strategy, and then again, it's a part of the questions. The essay is interesting to me, that they read a passage and then they argue how the author of that passage is persuading us. So a more interesting essay, I think, this time around. Obviously, we're going to need some close reading and analysis to write it well. Then in terms of the documents being used, like I said, Declaration of Independence, Federalist Papers, and as you can see, what I've underlined, close reading of rich, meaningful, and tough texts. And the key I want to highlight here is, even though the questions are just about words in context, the more we teach vocabulary, the more the students are going to be able to understand these tough documents when it comes to analyzing them. So we're doing our students a great favor by continuing to focus on vocabulary strategies. Okay, so here's the third handout that you're going to get that is basic strategies for answering test questions. The first one, like we've done before, if the question asks you to define the word, replace it with all the answer choices. So just like we did with the little Bo Peep example, this is a more obviously intense example from the SAT practice test that the AP College Board supplies. So literally, I just went to the practice test, took it myself, and copied these questions for you right from there. So these are straightforward, what they're giving us. So you see the word intense here, intense clustering of jobs. So then we replace that with emotional. That doesn't really work. Concentrated clustering of jobs, that sounds pretty good. Brilliant clustering of jobs, that doesn't make much sense. Determined clustering of jobs, maybe. So then when we read it more closely, concentrated clustering of jobs, innovation, productivity in a smaller number of bigger cities and city regions versus a determined cluster of jobs, innovation, and productivity in a smaller number. It doesn't sound like they're determined, it just happens that they're concentrated because obviously the concentrating is smaller number. Okay, so then the second idea about justifying your answers that we talked about with the Little Bo Peep example. Here, the question itself says, the first question says, the description in the first paragraph indicates that what Ethan values most about Maddie is her, and then you pick your answer. Good old Ethan Frome. And then the next one is, what is the best evidence to support that answer? So there you go. Next, I just wanted to talk about theme for a second, that if students encounter questions about theme, they should really look at the topic sentence and the conclusion sentence of the passage, as well as the topic sentence and conclusion sentence of each paragraph, as well as the beginning and end of the passage. And for me, sometimes my students don't like to read a passage once, let alone a couple times, so I always give them the trick to, if you can read the beginning and you can read the end and you can read the first and last sentence in every paragraph, you're going to do well. And so you can see here it's asking us about narrative shift, so that strategy works well. Looking at the beginning, looking at the end, and looking how things change. Okay, the essay question, I have some general strategies on this sheet that you can give to students as well for the essay question. Outlining your web before they begin, having that focus thesis, an idea for each paragraph. I always tell my students that because, in this case, this type of essay is asking them to read a passage and then explain how did the author come up with these ideas, that if they can underline the points they're going to use ahead of time, they can kind of group things together. So if I look at my passage and then I see, okay, line 5 sounds pretty good as I'm reading it, line 7 and 8, I want to talk about those lines. Those are pretty persuasive for different reasons. Ooh, I like lines 13 through 15. Maybe I bracket those. So they can, again, mark up their text as they're reading it and knowing what they're going to talk about, then they're not staring at a blank passage again when they have to look at it again and write their essay from it. And then my final point for students is to think about an interesting quote, general idea, analogy, something that you can start with and then refer back to at the end to sort of bookend your essay. So those are all tips that are on that sheet. I just wanted to show you how the essay prompt looks. At the beginning, you'll see, as you read the passage below, consider how Paul Bogart, who's the author, uses evidence, reasoning, stylistic, and persuasive elements. Then you get this lovely long passage, and then afterwards you get the exact essay topic. Write the essay in which you explain how he builds an argument to persuade an audience that natural darkness should be preserved. So students already get what he's persuading them about, but they have to prove how he does it. Okay? And so those essay strategies will work for you as well there. So these are the handouts you're going to get, the top 5 tips, the basic strategies for answering test questions, both the more easier version, as I like to say, with the Little Bo Peep, and then a little more complicated, a little stronger suggestions, a little more in-depth with your second sheet. So at this point, I would like to take some questions and see, go ahead and start typing them. Laura will also help me and let me know if people have questions that she may know as well. So hit me, Laura.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions here. So as I read these questions, please, we invite you to ask your own questions in the question box. The first question is, you mentioned the new redesigned SAT test. Mm-hmm. When is that going to be administered or started?
Okay, so the PSAT is going to start this upcoming fall of 2015. The SAT redesign itself doesn't start till the spring of 2016. So we've got some time to prep our students.
Great. One more question here written down. Where can I find more practice for my students? And they vary in different levels.
Okay. So in terms of practice, Ideas in terms of going to, I would go to the College Board itself, and the students can look at the practice tests, the SAT and the ACT both. When you go to the actual websites, they have sample questions that students can take. And then depending, I would certainly, because I'm a librarian now, there are many resources that we have in Ohio that are free. The Learning Express Library is a great resource that your librarian may have access to, where they can take a scaffolding test, and there's a lot of different resources that students can set up individual accounts and then take multiple practice tests and see how they're doing. So Learning Express Library is a great resource that I know we get as part of our Ohio consortium, and there's different aspects out there, so ask your librarians as well.
That's great. Here's a question. What type of outline strategies should I be teaching my 7th graders? So I guess they're getting ready for PSAT.
Yay!
But
7th grade.
yeah, but I mean other assessments as well, and just really good just writing skills. It's not all about the test all the time.
No, it's not. And I'm gonna let's see if I can scoot back on I'm gonna go back here a couple slides. Okay, so in terms of this outliner web, I think these are the big key. The second bullet is the biggest key. If you can have your students have an argument and say, okay, guys, what's the point of this essay that you're writing? If you can write that thesis down, and then if you can create a focus for your body paragraphs. And so if they can get a topic sentence, or if they can just have a general idea that if I want to prove that my cousin is an amazing athlete, then that's going to be my overall argument. My cousin's an amazing athlete. And then how do I prove that? Well, I think in my first paragraph, I might want to talk about what he does in terms of the baseball team. And so I might write baseball team, and then I might give myself some specifics. He's a pitcher, and he has a great swing. And then I might have another paragraph about, okay, skateboarding. I know he does a lot with skateboarding. He can do a lot of tricks, and he's got a lot of stamina on his skateboard. And my third one might be something about water. He can do a lot of different water tricks, jet skiing and other skiing. So I think just the idea of having students, and it can be a more formal outline with topic sentences and then key pieces of evidence. But at the 7th grade level, you can certainly do a web and just have the general main idea in the middle and branching off ideas. And I think it also depends on the needs of your students. So you might also want to scaffold it depending on some kids want more webbing and some kids want more outlining. But as long as you can get a thesis, key body paragraphs, you're doing really well. Great, that's helpful. So here's one question. Do you have samples of the revised SAT analysis of an argument? This teacher has only found one online. And I know I've looked myself, and I can only find, what the College Board has. So, Sarah, do you have anything, or maybe it's a task that you and I can team up together and put on your blog? I think that's probably the best in terms of where to get specific if you want an actual SAT redesign. That's where I know I would go for now, and hopefully they're going to have some more pretty soon as we get closer and closer to the test. I would also suggest asking guidance counselors or school counselors, depending on what they want to be called. They sometimes have some more resources as they get different packets from different places. So I would say asking them and also following through with, like I said before, the librarians are good places to go. So we have a few more minutes, so I'll take a couple more questions. Yeah. So do you have, I'll actually take this one, Sarah. Do you have a vocabulary book of root words to use with your students? And Sadlier doesn't have a vocabulary book of just root words. What we have is vocabulary workshop, which within the series, within the units, we do work with the root words and build on that strategy of pulling out root words, identifying root words, and the Greek and Latin roots. So you can go to www.sadlierschool.com and look at the vocabulary options there. And I'll speak to that too. I have found if I just give my students 20 roots and say, okay, let's talk about all the words with all the roots, it can become overwhelming because they go, okay, malevolent means this, and maleficent means this, and another word that starts with mal means this, and they sort of get jumbled up in terms of what each word means. So if they can just try to have a general idea, okay, mal means bad, when they attack a word, they're not going to have to war between, okay, the 10 different words I memorized that all start with mal, but they just have, okay, no mal means bad, so I know that this word is something negative. So that's why I like doing not a root study per se, but sort of bringing it up as they come up. That's my personal preference.
Okay, so here's a 10th grade teacher, and
nice.
She's in search of writing prompts, practice prompts, and saying that there are there's only one example on the College Board, so she also needs that. So I think we can steer her in a direction.
Right, and I mean they are in the vocabulary book too.
Yes.
So.
Okay. Well, that's all we have time for.
Okay.
I do want to thank you, Sarah. I do like this webcam. I think it works very well. So everybody sees that you are a real person.
I am.
And visit Sarah on her blog, vocabgal.com at saviourschool.com. And she's very approachable, and she's very enthusiastic about what she does. She definitely loves kids and loves words and vocabulary. One of the cool things that she does have on her blog is this column of author interviews. And she goes to different conferences, and she actually takes her little webcam and interviews authors about the words that they use. And these are authors that you are probably using young adult book authors, and you may be using them in your classroom. So it really is something to check out. And we thank you so much, Sarah, for coming today. We will have other webinars with Sarah as part of our series of webinars for vocabulary this winter. Check out the vocabulary webinar series at www.saviourschool.com, and then check under vocabulary, and you can see what webinars we're offering. And just one last thing, those of you that did attend last week, we apologize for the technical difficulties.
We're so sorry.
We are now masters of this technology, so thanks for coming back this week. We look forward to hearing from you again, Sarah, and to all of those that in the audience that have joined us today. Thank you again, and we'll be in touch with you. We'll send you out your handouts.
Absolutely. Okay. Please feel free to email, tweet, Facebook me, ask me any other questions you have in any other social media form. So I look forward to talking to all of you in some way.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
Thanks.